Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is that the Palestinians have been voted into another UN organization. This time they were voted into INTERPOL. INTERPOL voted to accept the State of Palestine as a member during their 86th INTERPOL General Assembly, which was convened in China on September 26th. Israel and the US worked hard to push off the vote. When the issue last arose in Indonesia in 2016, they successfully staved off new member status of the State of Palestine. This time, the move was so unsuccessful that the vote was not even close. 75 nations voted in favor of the State of Palestine, 24 voted against, and 34 abstained. The Solomon Islands were also voted in, but that move is hardly controversial. This vote marks another UN triumph for the Palestinians, who now have full membership in the organization and status on many committees and agencies. It marks another defeat for Israel. Israel's attempt to block Palestinian entry into Interpol failed because they chose the wrong argument, the wrong strategy. Israel argued that the Palestinian Authority was not a state, and as such, the Palestinians did not warrant membership. Of course that argument would fail. Most of the states voting for acceptance already officially recognize the Palestinian state. Actually, more nations recognize the Palestinian state than recognize Israel. With their new presence in Interpol, the Palestinians have a new stage through which to continue their attacks against Israel. They can use Interpol to issue international legal proceedings against Israel, against Israeli leaders, and against IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, military officers. Israel and the United States share the fear that the Palestinians will harass Israelis who are involved in defensive measures protecting Israel, and then charge Israelis with war crimes. But that's not even their biggest fear. Acceptance into Interpol brings with it an even bigger prize for the Palestinians. Interpol's most important role today is sharing intelligence on terror, and the Palestinian Authority is a major supporter of terror. They sponsor terrorists, they do not outright condemn terror, and they pay terrorists and their families for committing terror acts. The PA goes as far as to have both a full ministry and a cabinet minister, whose sole role is to provide for and pay terrorists and their families. There is even a menu of payments. The families of terrorists who die as a result of perpetrating their heinous acts get paid more than those caught, convicted, and imprisoned. The obvious fear is that the PA will take the intelligence on terror that is shared within Interpol and pass it on to their terrorists and the terrorist networks of their friends and allies. Intel leaks have already plagued Interpol. That is one of the reasons that some European countries, as well as Israel and the United States, do not share all of their intel with Interpol. Hamas and the PA are in the throes of negotiating a cooperation deal. Hamas is classified as a terror organization by the State Department and the White House. Now Hamas's partner is a member of Interpol. Interpol is headquartered in Lyon, France. It now has 192 members. It was established in 1923 as the International Police Commission. In 1956, it changed its name to the International Police Organization and called itself Interpol, which had been the organization's telegraph handle. It's an important agency playing a vital role in world diplomacy and policing. Today, they have about 750 officers. Interpol monitors and polices crimes that cross from country to country and searches for criminals who escape one country and go into another. Its raison d'etre is to share information and mutually assist member nations. Interpol is forbidden from any political activity or intervention on political lines. The objective is to preserve the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Palestinian Authority has been working hard on gaining admittance into various bodies and organizations within the United Nations. This successful campaign into Interpol followed a failed attempt for membership in the UN's World Tourism Organization. In that vote, the stakes were low, much lower, and Israel was successful. The Palestinians want these memberships as a way to de facto create their state. Each time a UN committee recognizes them, they are a step closer to statehood. Committee by committee, they are getting closer and closer to their goal and further away from the need for recognition by the United States and Israel. If their track record continues on this trajectory, the Palestinians will declare a state of Palestine, and there will be nothing the United States or Israel will do in order to stop it. I've been thinking about the conflict also between North Korea and the United States, and their leaders, Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un has declared that the rhetoric of the United States President Donald Trump is a declaration of war. He said that North Korea will defend itself and shoot down U.S. planes that are even close to, not even over, his country's border. We know that Kim Jong-un is the dictionary definition of a thug, but nevertheless, them's fighting words, or maybe not. A point of clarification is needed here. The United States and North Korea are already officially at war. The Korean War, which took place between 1950 and 1953, ended with an armistice. The war did not end with a peace treaty. It ended with a truce and a ceasefire. Officially, that means that the United States and North Korea stopped shooting at one another for a moment. That situation has not changed in 64 years. It's not as if a good relationship went sour. Since the start of the Korean War, the United States and North Korea have been in conflict, and as we've all been witnessing, there is no end in sight. Several U.S. presidents have benignly neglected North Korea and their unruly activity, but Kim Jong-un has pushed harder than even his predecessor dictator, Dad, and Donald Trump, who never likes to be pushed around, has said enough. The thinking in the Oval Office is that maybe it's time to push back, not because of pride or principle, but because Kim Jong-un is dangerous. As he becomes more and more arrogant, the safety of not only the region, but also the world is at stake. In many ways, North Korea dictator Kim Jong-un is an enigma to all of us. His character is uncharted. His actions are unpredictable. Both Western and Eastern analysts are mystified by his behavior and stymied by his rhetoric. U.S. President Donald Trump is also an enigma. His actions, too, cannot be predicted. North Koreans are simply stunned by Trump. They cannot figure him out. And that is why they have actually tried to hire Republican insiders. They need people in the know to help translate Trump to Kim Jong-un. Strange as it may sound, this is not unusual. Foreign countries often hire Washington thinkers. They task them with puzzling out and offering insight into U.S. leadership, with predicting the directions the U.S. will take, and with helping them understand the significance and meaning of U.S. actions and declarations. Back at home, every country employs hundreds, sometimes thousands of people to read and analyze columns, just like this one, to try to gain insight. Many of those people are called intelligence analysts in the foreign ministry departments. But now the conflict between North Korea and the United States is increasing. The risks are gargantuan. The rhetoric is ratcheting up and up. Both leaders are using words as weapons. Rhetoric is never the basis for a truthful debate. By definition, rhetoric is an exaggerated form of speech. It is most often non-creative and almost always repeats cliches. In ancient Greece, rhetoric was the art of speech. It later became a style of argumentation used to turn situations on their head. It was the sophists who made rhetoric famous. Rhetoric does not have to be true. It has to convince the listener. Trump and Un are threatening attacks. The words and actions are moving us closer and closer towards a very dangerous zone. North Korea continues to launch missile tests, and the United States continues to fly fighter jets and bombers near North Korea. This kind of saber rattling can be misread. It can be overdone. And when that happens, it causes dramatic and dangerous overreactions. That overreaction can lead to counteraction, which can lead to massive damage and deaths. The United States is not the only country ready to stand up to North Korea. China has decided to weigh in. The Chinese are all expelling all of the North Korean businesses. The announcement was made Thursday morning, September 28th. North Korean businesses have been given 120 days to leave. China is fed up with Kim Jong-un, and it seems that they are slowly removing the protective arm from North Korea's shoulders. In the past, China has protected North Korea on the world stage, but that has changed, and China has gone so far as to support new sanctions imposed on North Korea by the United Nations Security Council. Without Chinese support and trade, North Korea will be more isolated. No Western nation can tell Kim Jong-un what to do, but China can, and so can Russia. The Korean War began with Russia and China pushing North Korea across the 38th parallel and invading South Korea. Now, 64 years later, China and Russia need to once again step up to take charge. They're the only ones who can put the genie back in the bottle. And for the sake of the world, they must put that genie back in the bottle. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I want to discuss two columns today. Both are from the New York Times. First up is a column entitled, "We Are All Jewish Now." It's by Devorah Baum and was published in print on September 29th, 2017. Devorah Baum is a lecturer in English literature and critical theory at the University of Southampton and the author of Feeling Jewish, a book for just about anyone. The column begins by setting the stage and by trying to ask what it means to be Jewish. Baum writes, "Ask what makes them Jewish? Many Jews are naturally likely to point to religion, to rituals and prayers like the ones associated with the high holidays. Other Jews, not so much. Religion doesn't play any part in my life in terms of how I live my life," the comedian Larry David has said. "But I don't think I've ever gone through a day in my life without hearing someone say the word Jew or saying it myself." The insight of this statement is profound beyond belief. In other words, I can't tell you what it means to be Jewish, but it is a central component of who I am and of my core identity. Baum continues to follow the thought of Larry David. Religion does play a part in my life, but I still know what Mr. David means. For me, too, there's something about my Jewishness that is completely disconnected from the Torah, Shabbat, or the high holidays. Such is the modern Jewish condition. Devorah Baum is Jewish, but not connected to tradition or Jewish observance. She then asks the classic question which confronts the Jew in the modern world. Are Jews part of a separate community or part of the mainstream? How are they identifiable? Are they different? She writes, "Through all of modernity, the Jewish question hovered menacingly over Jews in the West. Shorthand for the series of suspicious demands. Who are you really? What is the nature of your identity? What unifies you as a group? Which club do you belong to? What makes you different?" It would ultimately lead Jews to the horror of the final solution. Now Baum suggests that one answer that Jews gave to their Jewishness was to reject it totally. She says, yet it would also lead Jews to question themselves. Who were they really? What was their identity? Where did they belong? They couldn't agree. They were split. And just as many nations assumed their identities in opposition to those they perceived as outsiders, many Jews sought to resolve matters by externalizing these splits and rejecting their fellow Jews. Now Baum moves to a strange tangent, which may be the central theme. And then there is humor, Jewish humor. It both defines and gives insight into the question. Baum cites Groucho Marx and Lenny Bruce. She writes, "Jewish jokes give us an inkling of this. Consider Groucho Marx's famous remarks. I don't care to belong to any club that will have me as a member." Or the story about the Jew who is stranded alone on a desert island and builds two synagogues, the one he goes to and the one he wouldn't be seen dead in. Lenny Bruce defines what Jewish is in a short set of one-liners. She continues, "Some 50 years after Kafka, the Jewish-American comedian Lenny Bruce had a bit he would perform, especially when he was playing at a home crowd in New York. It was called Jewish and Goyish. What, according to Bruce, was Jewish? Among other things, pumpernickel, fruit salad, Ray Charles, and what was Goyish? Kool-Aid, fudge, instant potatoes, and baton twirling." Now Baum concludes by bringing it back to Lenny Bruce and trying to make sense of it. She writes, "Lenny Bruce could have had a lot of fun with social media, listing his likes and dislikes and offending those with finer tastes. But the sensibility does very little to reassure the one who believes herself distinguished by her preferences. As much as our sensibilities may tell us about our differences, Bruce's Jewish and Goyish routine also shows us how slippery our differences are. Such uncertainty can be frightening, but it can also be something more. Bruce's exuberant remarking on our differences is also a high-octane performance of how much we can laugh about our differences, how pleasurable it can be to find oneself unbound by categories. We're not all Jews, but we're all becoming Jew-ish. So take a cue from Bruce. The other thing that feeling funny can lead to is fun. Baum tries to explain that part of the group identity is the struggle to define exactly what it entails. When so many people answered that humor is what made them Jewish in the Pew study on Jewish identity, we were mystified. What a ridiculous answer. Yet in this essay, Baum gives substance to that very thesis. Second up is an essay from the New York Times. The column is entitled Emancipation Day for Saudi Women. The online title is I Can't Wait to Drive in Saudi Arabia Again. In this case, the online title is much better than the print edition. It's written by Manal al-Sharif. Her piece appeared in the Sunday print edition on September 27, 2017 in the New York Times. Manal al-Sharif is a women's rights campaigner and the author of the memoir Daring to Drive, A Saudi Woman's Awakening. This theme is also the subject of our cartoon section today. Al-Sharif begins by simply telling her story. In May 2011, I drove a car in the city of Khobar, Saudi Arabia, to protest the kingdom's ban on women driving. As a result, I was arrested, taken from my home in the dark of the night, and jailed for 9 days, during which time I was interrogated, strip-searched, and accused of being a traitor and a spy. I was released only after my father begged King Abdullah, the ruler at the time, to pardon me. She continues, many people in my country shunned me afterwards. Clergymen called for me to be whipped, stoned, even killed. Within a year, I was forced to leave my job. Then, fearing for my safety, I left the country where I'd been born and grew up, and where I'd begun to raise a family of my own. Women before and after me have also been arrested, lost their jobs, and been jailed for the simple act of getting behind the wheel of a car. Al-Sharif describes how just 100 years ago, in the United States, women could not vote. But things do change, just slowly. She says that women driving in Saudi Arabia is just one tiny step, an important step, but just one, and there is a very long road ahead. She concludes by saying, take a deep breath and appreciate the moment. In her words, when I was forced to leave my country and my family, I dreamed of the day when I might return, not in an airplane, but by driving across the border and up through the desert to my home. Today, I no longer have that dream. Next June, when the change in policy comes into effect, I plan to make that drive. But for now, let us take a moment to appreciate every woman who has done the impossible and gotten behind the wheel. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. All the cartoons deal with women getting the right to drive in Saudi Arabia today. There were hundreds and hundreds of cartoons on this subject. I selected these because I think that they are some of the best. The first cartoon is by Jose Neves and is part of politicalcartoons.com. It is called Saudi Women Driving Ban Lifted and was published on September 29, 2017. A woman's head in the hijab is in the shape of a car. You can see her eyes through the slit in the hijab itself. The caption reads, 20th century, here we come. It's a play on Helen Reddy's famous song, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. Next up is a cartoon by Tom Jansen of the Netherlands. It's called Saudi Women Can Drive. A woman in a hijab is driving a Mercedes with a license plate that reads Saudi Arabia. Her husband is in the passenger seat, and he asks, where, oh, where are we going? The woman wife answers, the 21st century. In this final cartoon, by Arnand van Dam, also from the Netherlands, is entitled Saudi Arabia and the Human Rights Council. and it was published on September 27, 2017. Saudi Arabia is being grilled in the docket by the Human Rights Council and the judges. The Saudi Arabian representative responds, "Yes, indeed, we did totally destroy Yemen, but to compensate this, we will let women drive." In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. Since the recent vote for Kurdish independence, Iran has begun to squeeze the Kurdish region in Iraq. Almost immediately after the vote, Iran stopped flights to the Kurdish region. And now the Iranians have issued an order to stop all trucks from going to and from the Kurdish region. No Iranian drivers may deliver or ship or cross the border. That means no Iranian diesel to the Kurdish area. It's diesel that powers electrical plants and the transportation industry. The Kurds produce their own oil, but they do not refine it. They export it. Some of their oil even goes to Iran, but not anymore. Iraq is also squeezing the Kurds. So are the Turks, who are not permitting Kurdish oil exports to pass over their border. 92% of the Kurdish region voted for independence. In other words, every single Kurd voted for independence. The other 8% were Shiites and Sunnis. They were the minorities that live in the area who were also permitted to vote in the referendum. The Kurds were aware of the ramifications of the vote. They tried to mollify the vote by saying that their independence would not go into effect immediately, that the vote was simply symbolic. The problem is that at this level of foreign affairs, symbols have significance. We've been hearing about the change in ISIS and the momentum, about how ISIS is on the run in Syria and how Syria is taking back cities and towns and regions, and ISIS is being pushed out. Recently, ISIS took back a city named Al-Karatin, which is located in the Homs region, 190 miles from Deir al-Zur, where the main conflict with ISIS is now taking place. Al-Karatin was taken by a surprise attack. What is important to note is that there are always back and forths in momentum shifts in this kind of conflict. Clearly, the momentum is in the side of Assad right now, but ISIS is not giving up when it comes to Syria. ISIS still has a lot of fight in them. This should be a lesson for us. ISIS will not simply stop because they were defeated. ISIS needs to be completely and totally removed. ISIS needs to be wiped out. Russian President Putin visited Turkey, where he had a series of face-to-face meetings with the Turkish President Erdogan. The Russian-Turkish relationship, they agreed to create and to protect 4 no-conflict zones within Syria itself. They also confirmed that Russia will help build a gas pipeline in Turkey. And most important is that Russia agreed to build Turkey's first nuclear power plant. In the joint press conference, Putin said, "We confirm readiness to implement final agreements reached in mid-September in Astana about 4 de-escalation zones, including the biggest one in Idlib." He continued calling Erdogan our friend in Ankara and said, "Despite difficulties, we have achieved positive results. These agreements are our common, extremely important success." Turkey and Russia are working hard and working together to try to keep Syria safe. They also want to make certain that no new states emerge in the region. When a Palestinian terrorist murders 3 people in Haradar, the natural response should be universal condemnation. The 3 Israeli victims were murdered by a 37-year-old Palestinian named Nimir Jamal. Instead of condemnation, the official Palestinian Facebook page celebrated the murder and the murderer. The Facebook page called Nimir Jamal a hero. It read, "We mourn this heroic martyr," unquote. One has to wonder how interested the Palestinians are in peace. They didn't have to condemn him. All they had to do was remain silent. That would have been sufficient. Instead, they went so far as to proclaim the terrorist a hero. This is a public relations victory for the Palestinians. They murdered 3 Israelis and only lost 1 of their own. In their eyes, the terrorist, who was also a wife-beater, whose wife escaped to Amman, Jordan, and sought refuge and safety, abandoning her own children, is seen as a hero by the Palestinian people. This is a problem. It's not just a problem for peace. It's a problem for justice and morality. If there is no agreement about the principles of right and wrong, how can there be a possibility of achieving peace. The United Nations General Assembly is often a tedious waiting game, waiting to listen to speaker after speaker rehash old ideas, make vague, never-to-be-fulfilled threats or promises. Saudi Foreign Minister Adel al-Jaber, his speech was different. He made a surprise public pronouncement during his speech at the UN. Al-Jaber said that there is no reason for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to continue. He did not lay blame. He just said it can and should be resolved. The Saudi Foreign Minister said, and here I'm quoting, "The Arab-Israeli conflict is still the longest conflict in the region in current times. We don't see a justification for its continuation, particularly when there is international consensus about the solution based on two states," unquote. Bottom line is that the world pressure should be brought upon the parties to resolve the issue. World powers are already in agreement. Now the conflict must be resolved. To make that happen, the United States must put pressure on Israel. Saudi Arabia will take care of pressuring the Palestinians. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We have spent considerable time today speaking about the hijab and Muslim women's dress. Let me clarify some issues. The hijab is not the same all over, although the principle is the same. The idea is that modesty is important in Islam, and the Prophet Muhammad clearly teaches the value of modesty. A woman covering her head with a scarf is part of that modesty. The burqa is a more extreme hijab. The hijab is simply a scarf. The burqa is a loose-fitting garment that covers the entire woman's body and her face and her head. The head covering leaves only a screen, not even a slit, for her to see through. The burqa is often found in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Actually, if there is a screen, it is called a burqa. If it's a slit, it's called a niqab. And there are many places in the Muslim world and Muslim scholars all over who reject this official facial covering, not because they're more liberal, but because there is no tradition of it in Middle East or in Islam. Most Muslim scholars reject it because it comes from pagan traditions, and it's an import from the Far East. There is actually a serious dispute among Muslim clerics and scholars in Islam about the role of the burqa and the niqab, the full veil. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.